mean, the fact that it is sort of an open-ended module. I mean, Kong is to drums what Thor is to synthesis, right? And that you have a lot of different types of drum sounds that you can create. So when you're looking at the module selections, I mean, you have things like sample playback devices, the NN19 or NN Nano and the Nurse Rex loop player. But then you start getting into the physical modeled stuff, and we have both physical modeled kick drum, snare drum, and tom, and these are realistic models, where you're actually going to get the sound of a kick, and you can really go far out. When we just work with a few of these parameters here, you can see it's using Carpless Strong type thing. Turn that up just a touch. And that's just a pitch, but of course we have things like beater, level, tone, density of the beater. Turn down our decay a bit. Beater or a little bit more. And then when you get into your things like snare, give it a little bit more decay, change the tension of the bottom snares. And all this is velocity sensitive too, so as you start playing pads or keys harder, it's going to excite the model in a different way. Yeah. And then, of course, tom-tom. I mean, we're not going to go over each and every part, but then we get into the synth modeled stuff. So things like 808, 909 kicks, and even beyond those types of sounds are very easy to create. This is a type of sound that you could have created in Reason with Thor, but it would take you a lot longer to come up with the correct oscillator type and what modulating envelope is going to be changing the pitch and another one changing the amplitude. So this makes creating those types of sounds much simpler for every user that's out there. And so you can cover the gamut from just about any type of synth bass drum that you can think of. And with the hi-hat and the snare, same thing. I mean, you've got a lot of flexibility. But where things get really fun is that we're looking at just one of these pads. And you have 16 pads per Kong patch. So you can have you can have 16 different drums happening at one point, and you can even have them all triggered at the same time. So if I assign a couple of pads to the same pad group, then they will link up and they can have the kick with another kick layered on top, or a snare with a different snare layered on top. You also have things, if you see in the hit type over here, where you can have different types of hits. So for the hats, you have like closed, semi-open, semi-closed, or open. And when you get into the physical modeled snare, you have things like where you're hitting it, center, position 1, position 2, position 3, or on the edge. So within just that same model, you can have a few pads assigned to trigger that same model, but in different places on the snare drum. So again, it all adds to the realism. And then the last thing is that you've got new effects. And we didn't really talk too much about this, but actually with Kong, Reason has some new effects devices. And those being the new tape echo, which is a proper tape echo now. It's not a digital delay DDL1. This is a proper tape echo, which will give you that wobble and that feel of an old classic tape echo. Things like the transient shaper, which allow you to get more punch or take some punch out, or a little more decay or less decay on a sound. And you have also the rattler, which excites a sound and gives it a rattle, or runs it through a Carpless Strong type of a sound. And then a new reverb, which is the room reverb. And these are all completely new effects. I say that because even though we're looking at Kong, and you think, okay, I've got a snare and it's running through the room reverb, and that's great, and if I hear it, well, how can I get that effect for something else? Right on the back of Kong, you actually have audio inputs that will tie you directly into those effects, so they can be just be used as effects processors. So Kong can become not drum machine or drum modeler, but an effects processor as well. What leads them to do anything they do? I don't know. It's a great thing about the company is that they're constantly thinking of, as musicians or as a musician, ways to put the fun back into producing and ways to speed up the workflow, but then to keep it fun and exciting. And one of the things was when we talk about samples and working with samples, it's always been the thing where when you want to get samples into especially with computers, it's a few steps to get to the point of using it, right? And we thought back to, okay, back in the days of hardware samplers, you plugged in, you recorded, you're gone, you're ready to go, right? It was very easy and fun, and it really opened you up for experimentation. But in most computer in most computer software out there, sampling wasn't really truly sampling. It was recording audio to a track, taking that audio and dropping it into a sampler, maybe editing it somewhere else, or possibly within the software itself. But it wasn't a do it as you go, which is what sampling should have been. So I think, and I can't say for exactly because I don't know what their mindset was, but I think that their mindset was to put the fun back into the process and to the usage of sampling in music. Exactly. It's something that, to me, the slice edit mode does everything that I wanted to do with Rex loops, but I always had to go to an NNXT to do it. So in order to reverse slices or do some tricky little edits to maybe filter changes on just individual slices, you could do it in Reason. But you had to load that Rex loop into an NXT, and then you had to be very, very particular about changing, looking at the slice, remembering that's the slice I'm editing. It was fairly tedious to do. With slice edit mode, it's so easy that you just have the loop selected, you just select slice edit mode, and you've got all these parameters here that you can start messing around with. So you can start changing pitch, start changing and reversing certain slice loops. And you can hear that there. Maybe work with some filter frequency settings, so we'll give it a little bit of resonance here. And you're just drawing it in, right? It's again, open to experimentation. It allows you to go in there, it begs for you to go in and experiment and try new things. The other thing that's kind of cool is this alt. And what this alt does is it actually will randomly select which slice it's going to play. So when I put on select slice by MIDI, you're going to see that these are kind of jumping around a bit there. So it really, take a Rex loop that was a straight ahead sort of standard loop and make it something completely different than your own. And I've actually heard from some people, they say, well, I don't really use Rex loops. But I think when they actually go in and start working with slice edit mode, you're probably going to have a lot of people who never use Rex loops start using Rex loops.
I agree.
Well, I mean, the great thing about blocks is, and it's, again, we're not reinventing the wheel here, right? I mean, working with blocks or chunks, as some other companies have called them, working with arrangements in this way, where you're not looking at it completely linear, but more on a pattern-based, is nothing new. But what we're doing with it is actually giving you some other capabilities, which is the ability to use both at the same time. So, for a lot of people, it's either blocks or linear. With us, it's both. So you can have parts of your song that are set up as blocks, and then right on top of that same track, add a linear part, which will then replace the block part just for that one moment in time. So let's say for that one point you want to just add a little fill. Well, you can just do it, and then it will go back to the original block section at the next pickup. So you're not going to have to worry about going back into blocks, editing. And everything that you do in the block edit mode, if I were to take something and delete it from here, and I go back and look at the song, then every part where it had that bass part, it gets deleted. So any block that contained that bass and I deleted that part, it gets deleted as well. And you can do things like, with the blocks, since these are basically sort of locators or markers, I can change the length of a block, how long it is at the end, or I can change when it starts. So instead of it having always repeating on the one, I can have the same block repeat 3 beats in, as opposed to right on the one. So it's started to treat your song arrange sections as almost like they're recycle loops, right? So you can start chopping up parts of one block and another block. And I could actually go up here and say, 1 beat of this block, 1 beat of that block, 1 beat of this block, and start making some really wacky arrangements which contain a lot of tracks, but I'm just quickly switching from one section to the next. So it really allows you to experiment. And then, of course, if you want to then flatten it out to a linear arrangement, you can.